Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Rabinovitz, Certified Educational Planner, and I will be joined for tonight's webinar about college application essays by one of my coworkers, team members, Kathy Hart, who's also an educational consultant on my team. So without further ado, let me just remind you that this is being broadcast and recorded, so you'll get a recording as well. You'll have access to it. We're doing it through Facebook Live as well as YouTube Live. And there are several downloads for this webinar. You don't need them to listen to the webinar, but you can, go in and download them when you have time. Basically, I had recently done a webinar on the extreme surge in applications this past year due to test optional. And so I am sharing tonight, again, all the most important data from that presentation. I will be talking in general about what colleges look for in high school students, but with specifically tonight the focus on the college application essay. But the entire list of the most important factors in college admission will be on that infographic. I know that many of our listeners are thinking about the state university system in Florida for themselves or for their rising seniors or younger students. So there are admission statistics from a year ago. The current admission statistics for the students entering next month have not all been released yet. So that's something I will be eventually. And on that particular flyer with the Florida University System, which you'll hear me refer to as SUS, State University System, is also score at the TOPS SAT, ACT, and PSAT workshop schedule that starts later this summer and goes through the academic year. A recommended testing calendar for SAT, ACT, as well as some brainstorming tips that are very relevant to this evening's webinar. So again, your two presenters, Kathy Hart and me. And Kathy, by the way, also teaches AP English. So our agenda tonight is to really make sure that you understand the role that the college application essay takes in the whole college admission process, because we're often asked, well, colleges are so busy. Do they really read these essays? How much do they matter? What types of essays are there? We'll be answering all of those questions, including the most difficult one, which is like, how do you even start? Where do you get your idea? Because truly, there's nothing more difficult than writing about yourself. And I'll share some topics that have really worked well for kids by reading specific essays. And then finally, we'll talk about how you can further brainstorm ideas with your kids and then eventually with us, because we do a complimentary essay brainstorming session that we're happy to invite students to. So this is from the infographic that I referred to with the 10 most important factors in college admission. But our focus tonight is clearly on, the essay. And although it is down here as number 5, I'm going to tell you that it plays a bigger role than it ever has before because of test optional. Because so many kids have applied to college last year, and we know it's going to continue this year without an SAT score, colleges do need to rely more heavily on other information to really sort of flesh out who this student is, because many students will have very similar transcripts. So the essay is one of, I'd say, 2 things that have really grown in importance. The other one is the extracurricular commitment and the way that is showcased on a student's college application. So there are a couple of application platforms that are incredibly popular in today's world of college admission. The most popular one is called the Common Application, or Common App for short. There are over 900 colleges and universities on it, not just here in the United States, but actually around the world, although the majority of them are here in the United States. All 8 of the Ivy League colleges and 21 of our private colleges are on here. And starting last year, we were up to 10 of Florida's state universities that are on the Common App. And by the way, colleges do sign a pledge that They will not treat Common Application any different than their own application, if in fact they even have their own application. So there is absolutely no disadvantage, in fact, a significant advantage to using the Common Application. And in fact, a school like, let's say, Harvard does not even have its own application. You must apply using one of the application platforms, of which Common App is one. The other one that had started to gain a lot of popularity a few years ago, but it never reached the level of popularity of Common App. And I have to say that it appears that its popularity may be waning. It did start with all 8 Ivies, and only 5 of them have remained. Let's see, was it Brown, Cornell, and Dartmouth are no longer on it. There are about 150 member colleges of coalition application, but the weird thing is that not all of their member colleges actually accept the coalition application. Just as an example, Babson, which is probably the #1 university in America for entrepreneurial studies, is listed as a coalition application member on the coalition website. But if you go on the Babson admissions website, there is absolutely no link to coalition app, and it only suggests that you apply, using their own app, in fact, or Common App. And 3 of our state universities are on coalition app, UF, FSU, and University of South Florida. However, my strong suggestion is that you do these, if you're applying to any of these, that you do them on Common App, unless you are applying to one of the very few schools that is coalition application exclusive. And the only one that I'm aware of, and I haven't heard what their plans are yet for this year, is the University of Washington in Seattle, better known as UW. They were coalition exclusive. So if you were applying there and say just an UF, yes, you could use the coalition, but otherwise our strong suggestion is to stick with the Common Application or a college's own app if it's not on Common App. And pretty much almost every name brand college you could think of is on Common App. The 2 that I can think of off the top of my head that are not on Common App are Georgetown and MIT, both of which have their own application, and I believe that is all they accept. So let's get right into writing your application essays. You'll either hear it referred to as the application essay or the personal statement. They mean the same thing. It is an essay that is about you. Anything about you that sort of makes you stand out, gives you personality, makes you sort of jump off the page, separates you from your academic, your academic records, your test scores, but it's just something deeply personal to set yourself apart. And no matter what the question is that you're answering, you have to remember that the essay is about you. So you can't write about, let's say, your perspective on, say, world hunger, unless you're actually writing mainly about the things that you do about world hunger. So it's not like it's something that you could just take from a paper that you've written, let's say, for a history class. So Common App does give you 7 choices. Not really important to read them at this point. I will tell you that I've just bolded some of the important words so you can sort of scan through them to see the kinds of things that you might write about. But what I have in a slightly different color at the bottom, and score at the top, purple, is the essay that I happen to like best, to share an essay on any topic of your choice. It could be one you've already written, one that responds to a different prompt, or one of your own design. What's missing, of course, from that is that it must also be about you. So what we're really saying is you don't have to follow any of these prompts. These prompts are just sort of maybe a starting point or a brainstorming point. But as you're going to see later from the essays that we'll be reading, some of them don't answer any of the first 6 questions at all. And by the way, question 4 is new this year. It was the only change to the Common Application essay questions from the previous year. And for those of you who may need to use the Coalition app, you're going to see that there are 5 choices. Again, the bolding is ours, but notice that the last choice is to submit an essay on a topic of your choice. And again, it must be about you. And if you notice that Coalition app gives you a limit of 500 to 650 words. Let me go back to Common App. The shortest you can write is 250, but we certainly don't advise it. Maximum it's actually a firm limit of 650 words. With Coalition app, I don't believe it's actually a firm limit. It's a little bit softer of a limit, but our goal, our advice to kids is that you should probably be aiming for somewhere in the 500 to 600 word range. It is long enough for you to really leave a lasting impression, to give enough sensory details to what you've written, but it's not so long that someone is going to give up reading and say, I've read enough already. So it is very possible, and in fact, strongly urged that you use the same essay for Common App as you do for Coalition app, if you're doing both of them. And yes, they really do read your essays. They are incredibly important. And sometimes that essay really can be the tipper, can show a college admission officer something so special about you that they really want you. In fact, I have to say that today I received an essay draft from one of my out-of-state students that was probably the best draft and the most exciting topic that I had ever read before. I think that this essay is really going to help put her over the top, because it's not only so well written, but just so unusual in what she's written about. And hopefully I'll have her permission next year to include her essay in this kind of a presentation. So one of the things that sometimes can be confusing for kids is that all the writing that you've done throughout your life, say in English class or in history class, you've been told about that, 5-paragraph format where you're starting with a thesis statement, you're ending with some kind, of a summary, and you've got 3 body paragraphs in the middle to sort of support your thesis statement. Well, that all goes out the window. Not that you can't do that, but realistically, that's not what colleges are looking for. This is creative writing, truly creative writing at its best. You don't have to have 5 paragraphs. You don't have to have a thesis statement. You should have some kind of an interesting ending that either points to your future or shows how introspective you've been or what you've gained from this particular experience. But in fact, the essay that you're writing is almost like writing a short story. It's anecdotal. It's going to tell something very special about you, but it will show how introspective you are and what you've learned from that experience. But of course, with this level of freedom comes the challenge of how do you pick a topic? What best captures who you are and will distinguish you from, everyone else who's applying to those same colleges. So you have to think in terms of if what I write will sound like everybody else. Like if I write about, for instance, how much I love soccer, or the fact that my parents are divorced and it's really difficult on me shuttling back and forth, or that my parents are not American and, I've grown up in America, and so perhaps our values are different, or I have a foot in 2 different cultures. While there's nothing wrong with those topics, they're pretty common topics. And so you need to think, ask yourself, once you come up with what you want to write about, am I going to sound like a lot of other kids? And if the answer is yes, then the answer is no, that you don't write that particular essay. So, where do you begin? Because, let's face it, staring at that cursor blinking, at you on a blank computer screen can really drive you nuts. So you don't want to just sit there starting to write. You really need to do some kind of brainstorming. And the brainstorming, of course, should begin with, what do you know a lot about? And, of course, what you know a lot about is you. So selecting the topic is honestly the most crucial part of the essay process. And I think that for kids, talking to their parents is one of the best ways to start brainstorming. After all, no one knows the kids longer or better than you. And you may remind them about something that happened when they started elementary school, or something that happened at summer camp, or something that they just did this morning that was a little bit, unusual. Talking to your friends, to a college counselor at school, to teachers, to anyone who knows you well, to come up, with topics is, really the way to begin the process. But of course, then the answer, next question is, well, where do I find these best ideas? So I'm going to just give you a very brief list of some places that you could find the best topic. And I would say start by the place you spend the most time, which is probably your own bedroom. Open up your junk drawer in your desk, see what's in there, look what you have on your walls, rummage through your closet, see what memories, particular pieces of clothing bring back to you. Or maybe it's the mess in your closet, or, your dog who just walks in. Something in your own room may scream at you that it's worthy of writing about. Many colleges today ask for a resume, an activity resume, as part of the application. And if you've already started creating a resume, or at least have a good list of your extracurricular activities, you might scan through that list and think about something in that activity, some moment that changed you. Maybe you were a counselor at a camp for students with disabilities, and there was an autistic kid in your group, and you finally found a way to reach her. And maybe that's what you write about. You're not writing about your whole experience as a counselor, because that could get pretty boring. Lots of kids have counselor experiences, but the fact that you actually reached one student who was pretty unreachable, and what was that aha moment like for her, and what was it like for you and everyone around you? Maybe there's something that you know a ton about. Maybe you love solving math problems. And, when you go to sleep at night, little X's and Y's dance around in your head. I mean, I have to say I grew up sort of that way because I am a math nerd. And, you could write about your love of math and why you love it so much. Or it could be any topic that you know a lot about. But remember, you're writing about how that impacts you, not about that topic. Maybe you're writing about something that just didn't go perfectly well for you. COVID-19, if it had a major, major, major impact on you one way or the other, yes, it could be your personal statement, but you'll see that there's also an optional and truly optional COVID-19 essay that if it only had did not have an effect on you very different from your friends, that you might not want to write about it. What's the coolest thing about you? Is it your hair? Is it your glasses? Is it the way you dress? How about some time that you really failed, and what happened? What led you to failure, especially if you didn't expect it? And then how did you bounce back from it? Because colleges love to see how resilient you are. And when I said something like the coolest thing about you, you can take that as far as, how much you weigh, your sweaty palms. It could be having pimples. And I'm really serious. How much you hate your curly hair. Perhaps there's some core value. I would say I would stay away from something perhaps like, religion or birth control, but, something that is not controversial, but, something that, where honesty or integrity or friendship or trust means so much to you, and, one or two solid examples of how those play out in your life. How about your recipe for the best ever chocolate cookies, and when you make them and how they impact other people around you? I have a student who got into a very, very top tier college writing a fabulous essay about how baking chocolate chip cookies just brought such comfort under certain circumstances, and how he was planning to bring them, his recipe to college and make them certainly around finals time. How about, and think about this before you go to bed tonight, kids. What is it that you're thinking about just before you go to bed? Maybe that's something to write about. Take a look out your window. Not right now. It's still light out. At least here in Florida it is. And what is it that you see? And what does that make you feel? How do you think about what's outside your window? And if the front window doesn't do it for you, go to the back window. But look out your windows and see if there's some scene that particularly inspires you. What was the hardest decision you ever had to make? For me, one of the hardest decisions, I guess, was giving up a career in computer science to become a college counselor. And So it could be any decision that you really struggled to make, why you struggled, how you struggled, and how that decision turned out for you. I know some kids sort of have like some kind of a secret word that they like and that they might say to themselves over and over and over again, something that makes them laugh or lifts them out of, feeling sort of down in the doldrums. Maybe it's just writing about that particular word. I mean, here's an example. University of Chicago is known for its very unusual essays, and every year it gives you a choice of a number of new ones. And these are essay prompts that have been written by previous students who've been accepted to Chicago. So my favorite essay of all times was define X. Now, of course, as a math nerd, my X was solving problems. And so I could write a whole essay about solving problems. But it could also be something like, well, X marks the spot because I'm going on a treasure hunt. Or X, I can't sign my name, I'm illiterate, and so I just use, an X. So, that X for me sometimes just did not go away. What was the best gift you've ever gotten? Maybe it was the violin your grandparents gave you when you were 6 years old. You thought that was a pretty dorky gift, but by the time you were 8, you really embraced that violin, and today it's a major focal point in your life. Is there a favorite time of day for you? And it could be a specific time, like 3:15 when you get out of school. But it could also be those last few minutes before you get out of bed in the morning, or the few minutes that maybe it's 10 or 15 minutes that, you're in that nice hot shower every morning and getting refreshed and ready for your day. What is it that you think about in there? Or do you sing in the shower and the shower was running so hard that no one else could hear your voice? What if you looked at your Google search history? What might that reveal about you? In fact, we had a student who loved to read Wikipedia, and he gave a specific example of, something that he was looking up and how that article had mentioned something else in it and had a link to something else, and that one had a link to something else. And while he might have started with the Civil War, he ended up reading about unicorns. So, that could show something really interesting about you. You could write about your favorite song, your book, movie, performer, artist, singer, but, something that you just really love. I mean, maybe it was one of the Hobbit books. How about the most frightening experience? I know someone who was just thrown from whitewater rafting and saw his whole life go in front of him for, 30 seconds, 40 seconds. And, sort of what was he thinking about during that time? And then how did he feel afterwards when he was rescued? What was your happiest time as a child? And how does that impact you today? Or what about just the world that you live in? Whether it's like, say, the Boca Bubble, or whether, it's the neighborhood that you've grown up in. Maybe it's your favorite Dunkin' Donuts where you and your friends, meet and hang out. But once you have your idea, it's just sort of stream of consciousness that you just start writing. Don't try to perfect it. Just even speak into a microphone somewhere and just record your thoughts. Because essentially, it's not really what it is that you're writing about, but how deeply you care about it, how much it reflects about you, what you've learned as a result of what you've written. So you also want to think about whatever your topic is, like figuring out, like, what did you learn? How do you reflect back on it? How did that change you in some way? If you're writing about a person, let's say, who had an impact on your life, you're not summarizing or, saying ultimately about something that happened to them. It's like, what was the ultimate impact on you? How have you changed as a result of what you're writing? How have you grown? What have you reflected on as a result of anything that you've written about? And as you write your rough draft, forget about your editing anything. Just get your thoughts down on paper. Because honestly, you're going to write draft after draft after draft until you come up with the perfect essay. No one hits it right the first time. Whenever you listen to a speech someone is making, let's say in person or on TV, trust me, that speech was written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten until the speaker has felt it was, okay, this is done, this is baked, I'm not going to take it any further. So it's not like writing a paper in school where you're going to just dash it off one night and turn it in the next day. This is going to take, many drafts, many days, or even weeks. And of course, it's super important that you proofread. There's the worst thing that could happen is telling Princeton why you want to wear a Harvard Crimson sweatshirt. And trust me, that does happen a lot. Or spelling errors, or especially if it's not a spelling error in the sense that you've just used the wrong word, you've used lead instead of lead, or THEIR instead of THERE, things that spell check might not necessarily catch. So it's super important that you proofread. And before you finally submit, besides perhaps asking parents to read your essay or a friend to read your essay, but without a red pen in hand, please read your essay out loud, because you'll catch things out loud that you will not catch, let's say, reading silently. And if you haven't started writing your essay yet and you're a rising senior, hello, tonight or tomorrow morning, that is the time to start writing. Don't wait. You want to try to get as much of the application process done as you can before you go back to school in the fall, because senior year is going to be pretty challenging. So I'm going to now turn this over to Kathy Hart, who's going to talk a lot about the do's and the don'ts. But there's the first thing that, spelling error. College usually has 2 L's in it. So without further ado, here's Kathy.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Judy. And we will get started going through some of the do's and the don'ts for the essays. And just one thing I'll preface this with is that early drafts of the essay are going to have a lot more don'ts than do's. So students or parents, if you've seen your students' essays, if you've noticed that there are, a number of, I'll call them errors or early draft don'ts, these can easily be fixed. This is why we always emphasize the importance of writing multiple drafts and taking your time to write a number of drafts. So we'll start first of all with the do's. So these will give you some tips as you are, after you've completed your first draft and you're starting to work through those multiple drafts. What are some of the things you can focus on to improve your essay? So first and foremost, you always want to keep the essay personal. And obviously the personal statement demands that you have a personal essay, but even other essays that you might be writing about, whether it's a why this college, why this major, describe an extracurricular activity. There's a good number of other supplemental essays that you might see. All of your essays, you want them to come back to you. So you always want to incorporate a personal story. Now, certainly maybe in your longer personal statement, you might interact with a parent, a sibling, a teacher as part of that story, but just make sure, again, that most of those words are focused on you, that you're talking about your experience and you're talking about its meaning to you. So if you find that you're writing too much about another person, it might be a good time to either do some pretty big revisions there to bring the story back to you, or even perhaps that might not be the best topic for your essay and you may want to look at another topic. You do want to use a conversational tone. So what's really nice, Judy was talking earlier about how this essay is different from something that you might have written for an English class or a history class. You can use a more natural style of writing. The best way that I would describe it is, as you're writing it, look up and imagine you're telling this story to a good friend, to a family member that you're close to. How would you tell a story? You can adopt that natural tone. And because you're using a slightly less formal tone in your essay, it's perfectly fine to use contractions. It's also a great way to trim down words if your essay's running a few words over. You can use shorter sentences. You can use questions. You can use pieces of dialogues. I'll show you. We'll look at a few examples of those a little later on. But at the end of the day, of course, don't forget, this essay is part of your college application. It's an important piece of your college application. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're writing. And as Judy was going through the different brainstorming topics, you'll notice that all of them point back to you and to one moment and to one focus. And it's pretty interesting is the more narrow your focus is, especially in your personal statement, which sometimes can feel a little overwhelming, like tell me a story about your life. But the more narrow you can get that focus, you actually give yourself more words, more space to describe that story and to reflect on its meaning. So if the message in your essay is about how you're a good friend or you're responsible or you've shown determination and grit, your story, if you're focusing in one narrow area, you'll be able to describe that experience. And we'll take a look at that. And the way you're going to do that is through the details. When I'm focusing just on one, say, soccer experience or counselor experience, and if I can focus on that one area, then I can really incorporate all these really neat, rich details that will make the essay more interesting and actually make it more unique to you, even if it's a topic that seems relatively common. So for instance, you can see I just put two examples up on the screen. The first one, any of us could have written. We might like to be surrounded by interesting people. And these examples, by the way, do come from actual essays. But from this one here, from the revised version, you can see, oh, well, now the writer is telling me more about her observations. What sort of interesting people from different backgrounds has she spent time with? Here's another example as well, too. So this might be a classic essay about, your desire to help people, and you've been inspired because your parents or other family members have set a great example. Well, the first one could have been written by any student. This next one, the much better sentence example, gives these really rich, vivid, specific details and also paints a better picture of who this writer is, who influenced her, and which, she wants to work with fourth graders, which is quite admirable. And now we get a sense of that versus the original version, which was generic and didn't give any insight into who this student is. So this is what we call showing versus telling. And this is why the personal statement or the college essay, the application essay, is a piece of creative writing versus that analytical essay. So if we look at, here's another example where we just, we have someone that's not used to some fancy lab equipment, but when it's rewritten with those specific details, we can see, what does the fancy lab equipment look like? And we also get insight into the tension in this essay, the emotional stakes, that this writer is nervous. He's scared about what's going to happen if he messes up here. So we get a greater indication again into personality, into conflict, into tension. And plus we have those specific details because many students might have experience in a high school lab, but we know that this student's experience was unique because of what he went through. Now, of course, we've got a lot of, we want to include all of those vivid, specific details, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the essay stays focused on that subject, on that topic, on that message that we want to convey. So if we're looking at a 500-word essay, a 600-word essay, some essays are really, really little at about 50 words. So we want to make sure that every word, that every sentence points back to that message to that prompt that we are answering. So as you're moving through drafts and edits, you might want to start to, after you get kind of those content ideas, what am I going to focus on, narrowing down my focus, then you're probably going to start looking at sentence level revisions or even word level revisions. So again, you want to go back to that freedom and flexibility that you have with this sort of essay. And so you can look at varying sentence length. You can use a really short sentence, even a sentence fragment. How about a question or even an exclamation? Additionally, I've just put up on on the screen that transitions are important. We need to link ideas. We need to connect ideas. We need to move from paragraph to paragraph. And here's a few examples of some more conversational transitions. So they're a little bit less formal than ones you may use in an analytical or argumentative essay, but they work. They'll help guide your essay from start to finish. Another great place to not only improve the writing of your essay, but also to help you reduce word count is looking for instances of where you may have written a sentence in the passive voice, which is going to look something like this. It's usually the action was done by someone or something. And when you transform that, when you move it into the nice, simple active voice, not only do you reduce a few words, but you've got a nice, clear, concise sentence. So I'm going to conclude my do's with a few things that I think are the hardest to do in any type of writing, and especially in a piece of creative writing in a personal statement, is openings and closings. Good openings tend not to be written until about halfway through the drafting process. And I always advise students, and Judy showed you that on the slide, that when you're starting with an essay, when you're starting with a rough draft, some students will get stuck because they have no idea where to begin. They're like, how do I create an interesting hook? What do I do? Don't worry about it. You can find your hook usually after you write your essay from start to finish. Then go back and see where does your essay really begin. So if you're stuck on a great opening, trust yourself, trust the process. Get that rough draft down, give yourself something to work with, and then look for where you could start your essay. And just up on the screen, you can see two really great examples. There is a lot of rich, interesting detail. We got that short question mine in the second example. And we also got a sense of intrigue, right? We want to know what happens next. The writer hasn't given away the entire story within that very first paragraph. Another nice alternative, if you're not given to writing longer sentences, is you can start your opening with something that's short and sweet, but equally effective. And my favorite one is this third one, no more seltzer water for me. I would really like to find out where that essay goes and why is the writer opening with this statement. So you've got a little bit of that dynamic there, and the choices that you can make. You might have some greater description, or you otherwise might want to start with short, sweet, and concise. And they both still do the same thing. They both introduce an element of mystery and tension. Judy mentioned conclusions a few moments ago, and your conclusion for your personal statement will look different from an essay. You don't need to restate a thesis. You don't need to summarize your main points. Usually your conclusion will be something that might either call back to that opening image, that opening story. And usually the conclusion is the space in which you reflect upon, what did you learn? How did you grow? Why did that experience matter? Why are you telling the story? And that's the way that the conclusion will look different from a conclusion in an English or history or any other type of more analytical paper. So avoid summarizing. Your essay isn't that long. Your reader will remember the points that you've made. All right, so let's move on to some of the don'ts. And remember, early drafts, you might see more of these. Later drafts give you the opportunity to work on removing these. So first and foremost, is this is another place where I find that the student writers I work with sometimes get stuck, is they worry about, or their parents worry about, like, well, what do college readers want to hear? What should I tell them? Do I have to tell them this, and this? And it always goes back to you. It always goes back to that personal element of the essay, whether it's your personal statement or why this college or why this major, etc. So always when you're writing your personal statement, you don't need to, tell the college about how great they are. They know that. They want to know more about you. They want to gain more insight about you. So always come back to yourself. Always come back to that personal statement and bringing in more of you, because that's the purpose of the essay, right? Is to introduce you, the wonderful human being, to your readers, your audience, which are your college admissions officers. Of course, you want to be respectful to your audience. So you want to leave a positive, lasting impression, not a negative one. So avoid any cynical or condescending tones. Again, respect your reader. And as you're going through and choosing a topic, you want to avoid writing a resume. Now, an early draft might sound like a resume, and this is where we always come back to that narrow focus. So if you start out with a sentence such as this one, which is enumerating all of your junior year activities, to me personally, I want to know more about working at a cheese factory. So that might end up being the sole focus of that essay. Likewise, if you're describing a personal experience, something, again, you got extracurricular activities, job, travels with your families, and while certainly those might be more common topics, again, when you narrow that focus and you don't tell about your entire trip to France from start to finish, you're going to have a really interesting essay. And so here's a few examples. You can describe a single service, one meal, one shift of scooping ice cream at Sloan's. Actually, one of my favorite essays, and this was from a number of years ago, and I still remember it. And it was a student who wrote about the day in the life at his job, and he was just a very poetic, very beautiful, very gifted writer. And it was a great story, and he was describing just what his summer job experience was like, but he really focused on a single day and opened up with talking about what a morning looked like there. So it was a really, really nice essay. And here's where you start finding the balance, right? You have 650 words, you have 250 words, you have 50 words. You're figuring out, that balance between, when do I elaborate a little more with those specific details? When do I opt for short and concise? And you'll find that right in the middle, that your message that you want to convey in your essay will fall somewhere in between. And so you can see here, again, when you're looking to perhaps trim down extra words in an essay, is, into society today can be now, it can be today. The I'm a slob sentence has a much greater impact than its longer version, and that'll probably also give the student more opportunity to trim out any excess words, or actually and also to add in maybe some additional details. Another area that I'll often advise students to look for if they're trying to reduce word count in an essay is to avoid those what I call cushioning verbs. So if you wanted to do something, if you tried to do something, if you were able to do something, get rid of those words and just simply have that main verb. Go back to your active voice. I did this, I did that. Not that you wanted to, or you tried to, or were able to. And that also can help reduce that wordiness in your essay. And then, of course, another example, we as humans, are we something else? You don't want to bore your reader. The missions officers are reading a lot of essays. And so when you're coming back to that idea, well, how can I be interesting? It's going back to that very narrow focus, writing about you and providing those interesting details and taking the time to go through those brainstorming questions that we shared at the start of the presentation that can really help you come up with a interesting, unique topic. And also you just want to be careful that you're not so memorable or so eccentric that your essay comes off as a little odd or strange. Some students really have a gift for writing in an unusual fashion. And if that's something that's natural to you, that might be a possibility for your personal statement, but don't try anything new. If you're a good, short, funny writer, you can incorporate that into your personal statement. If you like longer sentences, more vivid descriptions, write to your strength, and that'll make your essay interesting. Another way of coming up with what's an interesting topic? I just did a brainstorming session with one of my one-on-one students several weeks ago, and we went through a number of topics for a personal statement, and a huge smile came on her face when she found the one that she wanted to write. So trust your gut. What interests you, what you want to spend a lot of time on for your personal statement, will also be interesting to your reader. So just to take a moment here to talk about, if you're going to write about a potentially sensitive subject, always go back to the fact that your essay is part of your Common App. It's part of your application. So keep that in mind when you're choosing what topic to write. And if you are going to write about a potentially sensitive subject, think about, can you write about it looking back with a more objective view? So if you're still in the middle of an experience, it might be difficult to fully write about that experience and then reflect on what you learned or how you grew, what you gained, how your life changed if you're still in the middle of that experience. So if you have a little bit of distance, that can be a good deciding point, whether you want to write about this for your Common App personal statement. Another point would be, always make sure that you ask for feedback. If you're unsure, write a draft of your essay, ask a trusted teacher, a parent, an educational consultant, a guidance counselor, and get their feedback and see if it seems like it might be an okay topic, or maybe it might be something that should be personal writing that stays personal to you for now. So that's as far as pretty much for personal writing. Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you do want to give admissions officers a little bit of context, like let's say, there was a divorce in the family and your grades dipped as a result over the past year, and you want to share that with your college admissions readers, but you don't want to write it as your personal statement, there are other places on the application. On the Common App, it's an additional information text box. It falls under the writing section of the application. And this can be a place for you to add in, if you want to give a little context, a little background, let your readers know the reason for your dip in grades. However, if you don't feel it's a good personal statement topic, you can find something else to write about. In writing, early drafts are going to have a lot of cliches. That's okay. The easiest way to remove cliches is to do exactly that. Remove them. Trust that your essay, through that showing, through the details, is sharing your story, is sharing that whatever you want to convey with the cliche. If you're not 100% sure, that you're like, well, maybe I still want to elaborate. I want to emphasize that I value hard work and that I set my mind to something, I can achieve anything. Okay, take that cliche, but then rework it in a highly personalized fashion using details from that experience that made you understand that sentiment that's originally written as a cliche. So you can see a good example about that. So always going back to that show, don't tell. Here's a few more examples. Students that travel often find it broadens their horizons. Great, let's see some examples. What does broadening your horizons look like to you? And then another place where sometimes you can run into cliches or better yet, more generic empty statements is going to be many colleges ask you to write about why this college. And initial drafts of these essays, you could plug in, honestly, any college or mostly any college in the US and international. Most colleges do have well-regarded professors. Most colleges do have intellectually curious students. So to avoid these empty generic statements, do your research. And again, come back to you. Why have you fallen in love with this school? How has what it offers align with your interests and what you intend to bring to the college? Don't use a thesaurus. If you find yourself going to thesaurus.com because you keep repeating the same word over and over again, maybe it's time to combine some of those ideas, or maybe get rid of that word altogether. If you've got a naturally sophisticated vocabulary, it's okay to use a few of those 50-cent words here and there. But otherwise, the simple yet professional prose will communicate your idea. You don't need to feel as though you need to impress your readers and look up all the big words in the dictionary. Conversely, don't use slang. You are writing an essay. You're not writing an email or a text message. You don't want to use any abbreviations. Avoid words that are a little bit not quite as mature, like very, a lot, cool, awesome, and nice. Actually, very is a great word. If a student's trying to narrow down an essay and they've got a few very's, I'm like, just take them out. It was rainy out. You don't need to say it was very rainy out. It was rainy out. That works. That conveys your message. That conveys the setting. Don't forget that contractions are great because that helps lend that conversational tone to your essay. And of course, never, 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 never plagiarize, buy an essay on the internet, or have a parent write your essay. Admission officers can tell when an essay it hasn't been written by a 16, 17, 18-year-old student. It tends to be pretty obvious. Also, don't recycle an essay unless it truly fits another prompt. And then pay attention. Sometimes a school might ask about a community or your role within a community. Another college might ask a similar essay, but with a slight twist on it. So you can keep the same themes and the same ideas, but just go back to the prompt and make sure you're answering the question that they're asking. It's relatively rare that you can truly reuse one essay from another. And of course, please, please, please proofread. You don't want to submit something that is very sloppy. Again, the spell checker isn't necessarily your best friend. I have seen essays, early drafts that had collage, AGE, instead of college, EGE, and the spell checker won't pick that up. And of course, make sure if you're make sure that you're not sending, in this instance, your Yale essay to Harvard or vice versa. So always do that final check. And then it always comes back. So bringing it full circle back to my first slide there, it always comes back to you. So don't forget that. So think about, this little idea about your personal statement. If I were to drop my essay on the floor, would someone come up and be like, oh, this is definitely an essay that was written by Kathy Hart versus one that's written by Judy. So if the essay should definitely have you on that page, and it should be something that it's unique to you because you're really writing from that close personal experience. All right. So let me show you a few examples of see what you can find what's wrong. So let's look at this first statement here. I entered onto the scene of this terrestrial sphere on a vernal evening in 1994. So we got too wordy, too much of a thesaurus, doesn't paint a descriptive enough picture, or nothing is wrong. So hopefully for this one, you picked up A and B would be our two correct answers. It's too many words for something you probably wouldn't even include in your essay, which would be when you were born. And again, the overuse of the thesaurus there. Here's another one. I won't read this in its entirety, but it starts out as a high school college sophomore. I started the Bishop's Ball. I played JV soccer. I coached soccer for my town. So we've got A, rambles. B, covers too many different things. The comma after ball should be outside the quotes. Or D, nothing is wrong. And again, hopefully for this one, you picked A and B. It keeps going on and on and on, and it doesn't have that narrow focus. So the student, if they were going to rewrite this, would pick one of these activities and perhaps elaborate more on it. Here's another one. My friends and I love to spend weekend evenings together. We get along really well because we share so many classes together, and all of us are in the same 2 clubs. So we got A should be 1 sentence. B reveals a little about the writer, lacks focus. C should be my friends and me. Or D, nothing is wrong. And so for this one, it's definitely going to be B. Notice how there are other people in this essay. If this essay continued as written, we wouldn't get a good sense of who the writer was. We might know their friends a little better. And also maybe A, you could pick, you might be able to combine these ideas, but definitely this is a good example of incorporating other people versus keeping the focus on you. Here's another one. I had no experience discussing human rights or mandatory minimum sentences. What I did have was determination. And so we got A, the writer reveals nothing about herself. B, second sentence is too short. C, vocabulary is too simplistic. And D, nothing is wrong. And if you picked A, you would be correct. It doesn't really say anything. I mean, certainly there's a lot of potential here, but we don't really know much about the writer. I know it is all in good nature and we all laugh, but it is interesting to see the tables have turned. Certainly there are a good number of things that you could do to improve this one. We could start with A by looking at the contraction to put that in, and this is where reading things out loud, you can hear that sounds kind of formal, but is natural. We almost tend to put that in. For B, needs a comma after nature, we could certainly put one in, and I would probably argue rewrite this in sentence entirely. It's a bit too long, a bit too wordy. And then we got tables have turned, it's a little bit more of a cliche. There certainly can be a better, more personal way to write that idea. All right, so now I am all set with my part of the presentation. So I'm going to turn this over to Judy so you can hear a bunch of essays that got all the do's. So thank you.
Before I start reading some essays that worked, I'd love to answer some of the questions that have come in.
Would it be a good idea if I were to brainstorm topics for an essay if the college I'm applying to hasn't released a prompt yet?
Okay. So can I brainstorm essays, essay ideas for a college which has not yet released its prompt? So first of all, chances are you're going to need the personal statement anyway, because almost everyone, even when they're not on the Common App, unless they're not very selective, generally has a personal statement that's about you. But let's say you've already done that and you're now thinking about, well, what will be the supplemental essays? There are actually a couple of places that you can look, first of all, to see if the supplemental essay is available yet. On August 1st, Common Apple will be, first of all, will come up afresh for next year, when anything you've started this year will roll over if you answer their questions correctly, essentially asking if you're rolling your information over to the next year. And any prompts that have been released will be there at that point. There is also a website called prompt.com that I believe you can either get a membership in or you can search through their website, because once a week they update and let you know what prompts have come out. And the final thing is that you can look at last year's prompts for any college, and I'd say there's probably a pretty good chance that they will keep their prompts the same. There is no guarantee, but it's highly likely. I'd say we see them staying the same much more than we see them changing. So hopefully that helps.
What do you think about writing about conflict in my family due to the 2020 presidential elections?
Wow, that's a tough one. What do I think about writing about conflict in your family due to the 2020 presidential election? So I assume you're saying that one of your parents is red and the other parent is blue. It depends how you approach it. And it may be the type of thing that you start off talking about primary colors, that when you first learned about them and how they blend together. But sometimes they are, polar opposites. And I think if you don't take a side, but show the fact that how conflict can, let's say, perhaps destroy harmony in an otherwise peaceful family, that it could be a very insightful essay, but you need to be sure that you don't take sides and that you don't say, well, he's too conservative or she's too liberal or the other way around, because you don't know who's going to be reading your essay. And as long as you also draw the conclusion about, well, what did you get, learn from this experience? How did you gain if, your parents or siblings, all had completely different ideas about who should be the next president?
Will the COVID-19 part of the essay be overlooked or not highly regarded by admissions officers?
Okay. So the question came up about, let's say, the importance of the COVID-19 essay. So it is optional. It's on the 6th page of Common App. It's towards the very bottom. It's after your personal statement. It's under additional information. It was introduced last year and it's being carried over this year. It is one of the only times you will ever hear me as a college admissions professional saying optional really does mean optional. Most of the time, optional means required, in my opinion. If you feel that you were impacted by COVID-19 in an incredibly positive or negative way, positive in the sense that you were, resilient, you helped others, whether it was in your own family or some community service project that you got involved with or started, or negative in the sense that, there was loss within your immediate circle of friends, or family, and how that impacted you, but also how you bounced back, hopefully. I think it could be very, very important. But if you feel that the impact of COVID-19 on you and your, immediate family was relatively similar to, your friends' experiences. I mean, sure, the experiences were horrible for everyone. No one wants to be locked down. No one wants to feel disconnected from their friends. Whether you love school or hate school, no one loves to just be home in front of the computer and not, interacting. Think of all the other, things of school, all the way school enriches your life. But if you feel that the impact on you was not much different than, your next door neighbor or something else, it's perfectly fine to leave it out. There are some college admission officers who I've heard speak. We did a whole series called COVID Conversations with Colleges. We interviewed admission deans last year from about 50 or 60 different colleges. All those are recorded on our website, actually. And there were definitely some who said that it was the student's essay of the impact on COVID that really swung the pendulum in that student's favor, either because of the great hardship that student, suffered, but yet managed to come out on top of the game in terms of academics or testing or just the way that they were expressing it, or a student who had, really became so resilient and helped, others. So there definitely were cases where that made a very significant difference. But if it hasn't made a big difference, a huge difference for you, different than your friends, I would say ignore it.
Would you say that the essay should tie in to your major in some way, especially for STEM?
Okay, so that's an excellent question. Should the essay tie into your major for STEM or anything? I'm going to say no, because many colleges are going to ask the question about why you chose that particular college or why you chose that major or that major at that college. And no matter how that question is asked, you can address both the university as well as the major. And if your major is something in STEM, whether you're going to be pre-med or neurobiology or computer science or mathematics or engineering, you'll be able to wax poetic, perhaps not in that many words, but in the why essay. And I think that they want to know that as someone who is keenly interested in STEM, that you also have some other outside interest. So I would be tempted to say, most likely I would not write about, how I started playing with Legos at age 2. And now, now I really want to be, an engineer. So, I mean, of course, if there's nothing else that you feel really is, sort of a touchstone for you to write about, then, by all means, write about something related to your major, but it would not be my first choice.
Would including the aspect of divorce be too cliche to talk about in your essay?
Okay. You have to, okay, so the question is, should I be writing about divorce? Is it too cliche? Think about, let's say, friends who you have whose parents are divorced, and if you feel that the impact on you of your parents' divorce is somewhat similar to what your friends may be going through, then it's not worth writing about. First of all, through Common App, they'll know that your parents are divorced because you actually have to state not only who you live with, but what is the marital status, of your parents. So they'll know that you've been through, a divorce. But if you feel that divorce had, an unusual impact on you, then it's very much worth writing about.
And the student who asked about writing about politics clarified that it's his or her views that differ from the parents, and wants to know whether or not if he can take a side if the issue matters a lot to him, and he's or her, and they'll only be applying to liberal colleges, not conservative ones.
The thing is, the college may be liberal, but you don't know if that person who's reading your essay, is conservative. And I do think that you can talk about the fact that, how your perspective is very different from parents. And honestly, that's not at all unusual where the parents are conservative and the student is liberal. In fact, one of my former clients basically said to me, Judy, I don't know what I did wrong. I raised 3 kids in, sort of an upper middle class, really nice lifestyle. They've traveled, they've gone to camp, they've had, all the benefits. And they've come home from college as little communists. That was his exact words to me. And all 3 of the kids did go to incredibly top tier universities. So I think that's pretty common. More common than you think, where the children have, more liberal perspectives than their parents. And I think it's okay to write about, but I think you may want to talk about the fact how you can see, that where there may be areas for compromise, or where you can understand why they are coming from that, perspective. But you should never, ever conclude with anything saying that, I'm right and they're wrong. Okay, so let's now talk about essays that worked. And these are essays that I have permission to read to you. That none of them are from the last year or 2 or 3, so they're not going to be, let's say, kids that you might necessarily know or be able to identify. And every one of these students did get into his or her very top choice college, and most of them wound up in very highly selective universities. So you can see that the first one is about a guitarist, although that's not the author. But anyway, when I was in 7th grade, my best friend's older brother gave me quite possibly the best advice I've ever received. Always keep a guitar pick and some change in your pocket so that when a girl asks you for a quarter, she'll see you play the guitar and instantly fall in love with you. That was it. In one moment, the singular purpose of my young life became clear. I was going to become a rock star. As I set out to teach myself guitar and keyboards, I encountered the first of many obstacles. My mother, the budding rock critic, the enemy. On a nightly basis, she kvetched. And by the way, kvetch it's a Yiddish word. It's also a German word. And it means like complained, but didn't even let up, just complained to complain. You know how your parents can sometimes nag you? Okay, they're kvetching. Okay, so on a nightly basis, she kvetched, and that's in italics, about the god-awful noise bleeding through my bedroom walls. This is beauty, Mom. This is the avant-garde, the future. I never faulted my mother's lack of sophistication. Retribution, I was sure, would come when she saw her son's face plastered on the television screen, crooning to hive-like swarms of pleading women. My drive remained unshaken, my dream undeterred. Although I ignored my mother's failure to appreciate my art for as long as possible, the larger meaning of her response soon became unavoidable. Towards the end of 8th grade, as puberty brought me to its strangest stages, the principal of my middle school notified me that I was to be called up at the end-of-year awards ceremony. I instantly imagined rocking the roof off the school gym. My friends would scream. Parents and teachers would gush in awe. Glory and fame would finally be mine. Maybe I would even take my shirt off. 7 days later, I felt nothing but mortified as I walked up the stairs to the stage to receive an award for earning a perfect score on the National Latin exam. And he writes in Latin, "Fac me col colerio vomere," which means gag me with a spoon. By 10th grade, I was confident enough in my musicianship to form my own band. During classes, Michael, my chronically tardy but well-intended bassist friend with a sweet Fender amp, and I passed countless notes of potential band names, each one more charming and clever than the next. Sorry. To the Republic, too pedantic. The Robots, too soulless. The Transcontinental Love Express, too bubblegummy. The Stop Codin, perfect. The 3 bases in DNA that signal the end of a polypeptide chain provided just the right mix of strangeness and erudition. We were going to be the coolest 15-year-olds ever. Our debut, however, was met with less than encouraging reviews. As we rendered our hearts visible to the world, emoting with a sense of reckless abandon, most of our friends, after reassuring their love of us as people, left the room. The few who remained threatened bodily harm. As my 18th birthday approached, I was compelled to acknowledge that the prospects of my dream of becoming a rock star were fading rapidly. Other things were changing too. My tastes in music were becoming more eclectic and obscure. My longstanding interest in politics was strengthening. I was discovering that I didn't need to be a rock star to interest girls. My academic talents, previously a source of considerable self-consciousness, no longer embarrassed me. The path I was choosing was taking me to college, not to a record deal in LA. Within the contours of this realization, I recognized the conclusion of my childhood. Up on the horizon, I caught the first glimpse of my adult life. But still, even now, when the mood is right and no one is home, I sling my axe over my shoulder and crank the amplifier up to 11. With the lights low, I strike the sexiest of poses and gaze a dead stare into the mirror. I let the first chord rip. Despite everything, I am Brian Sinclair, rock star. Name changed, of course. Okay, next one. So the first one I thought was very funny. It chronicled something all the way back to 7th grade, used fabulous vocabulary, made some great allusions to things that he's learned, in school. You can tell he's very bright. Not just always serious, but I thought it was a superb essay. Okay, so here's a more serious one. Have you ever seen a cat pounce on a bird? Have you ever witnessed the rippling of feline muscles, the quick, desperate jerking of feathers, and the deadly looming silence that follows? If you have, you would most certainly understand how this fundamental act of nature is perhaps life's most humbling phenomenon. For a child, mortality is a concept that is difficult to grasp. In fact, mortality is difficult to grapple with at any age. Exploring my grandmother's garden with the innocent eyes of an 8-year-old, I witnessed my grandmother's kitten attacking a hummingbird, and the idea of mortality slowly came into focus. My grandmother's house in the ancient town of Ashkelon on the coast of Israel is surrounded by a garden crowded with fruit trees, a fence wrapped with untrimmed honeysuckle hedges, and stone-paved pathways bordered by sunflowers. The overall effect of the place is enchanting, and the butterflies and birds that so frequently kiss my grandmother's flowers recall images of the Garden of Eden or Burnett's The Secret Garden. One dew-filled morning, I noticed that my grandmother's kitten was intently gazing at something only inches away. The kitten was studying a little red and green hummingbird with its long beak and a honeysuckle flower, entirely unaware of the cat's close scrutiny. The hummingbird, no more than 2 inches long, almost seemed like a colorful extension of the honeysuckle, with its rapidly moving wings resembling a ring of petals around its body. Mesmerized by the little bird, I was remembering some trivia that my 2nd grade teacher had told me about hummingbirds' hearts beating incredibly fast. Suddenly, the kitten raised its belly from the floor and tensed the muscles in its back and legs. Before I could react, the kitten pounced on the hummingbird, and all I could see amidst the rustling of feathers and fluid movements of the cat was the desperate spark of fear in the little bird's small eye, quickly extinguished. as the feline's jaws engulfed its body. Snapping back to reality, I attempted to pry the kitten's jaw, but he held his jaws tightly together, refusing to forfeit his hard-earned prey. I screamed at the cat and pulled at his jaw, but the orifice remained closed. And after a few hysterical moments, I gave up trying to save the little bird. I ran to my grandmother, sobbing wildly and telling her what her despicable cat had done. But she just patted my hat as I cried upon her apron, explaining that this is the way life works and that I eat chicken all the time. Frustrated with her lack of compassion, I went to the bedroom and continued to cry. It seemed so unjust that something so beautiful and vibrant one moment was little more than cat chow the next. However, as I was stifling my last bitter snivel, I began to consider what my grandmother had said. Perhaps the hummingbird did not live very long, but then again, adults are always saying that life is short. In that instant, I took hold of what I had never before understood: mortality, the transience of life. Reflecting on this encounter, which seemed horrifying at the time, awakened in me a purpose of life, to take advantage of the time that is given to me and utilize it to the best of my abilities. I began to more avidly pursue my long-term goals with the understanding that I may never see them achieved, but that simply striving to achieve them could be as rewarding as actually accomplishing them. That hummingbird helped me to resolve, even as a young girl, that no matter what happens tomorrow, my dreams and goals give purpose to my life today. Okay, so do you see how she reflected on that whole incident and sort of the beautiful words she used? This was not a kid who went to a thesaurus. This was a kid, AP English language, AP English lit, A's, very high SAT or ACT, reading, writing scores. So everything justified the vocabulary, that she used. But this was just one brief memory she had from childhood. Okay, so here's an essay about a student who wanted to go to med school. And by the way, today is a practicing physician. Okay. A twinge of relief passed through my body as I loaded my first well. Maybe gel electrophoresis isn't that bad, I thought. Then I noticed the dye spreading throughout the buffer. The source? A hole my pipette had poked through the well. I had ruined my first gel. In spite of such failures, I've always had a passion for discovery, whether looking under a rock or over a bacterial culture. Throughout high school, I've found an avenue for my exploratory nature in the laboratory. Research has been a medium of education, teaching me more than I've ever learned in the classroom. My research career resembles a soap opera. Wisps of opportunity intermeshed with frequent heartbreak. Nevertheless, its impact on me as an individual is unquestionable. Stepping into the research world in 9th grade, I knew exactly what I wanted. My friends before me had always seemed to have projects dealing with cancer, AIDS, or some other breakthrough scientific topic. To have such a project, which always seemed to earn my friends countless awards and scholarships, was my sole objective. However, when I tried contacting medical labs in my area, nobody seemed to want a petty freshman. After a month of fruitless searching, my conscience compelled me to seek research elsewhere, and I contacted a plant physiology lab. I remember thinking that this, quote, plant project was a last resort. However, I ended up learning invaluable laboratory techniques while adapting. I realized that plant biology was just as complex as cancer. I habituated myself to my project by extensive journal reading and by note-taking. By the time of science fair, I was extremely comfortable with my experiment. I ended up earning Army and corporate awards and a trip to the state science fair. In 10th grade, I actively pursued a botany project with a dramatically changed mindset from a year ago. And I learned from the experience that the only asset that really matters in research is my determination to conduct and excel in my investigation. The repudiation of my romanticized view of research taught me more valuable lessons. I've discovered that the lab is not a place for perfectionism. Every day in the lab, I face multiple setbacks. Whether it's something as inconsequential as a broken pipette or as devastating as a contaminated protein, failures are inevitable in research. During my 11th grade summer, I attempted to express a particular kinase from its DNA. I had proceeded to the penultimate step of my protocol when I discovered that the gene would not ligate to a particular vector, thus voiding all of my work up to that point. However, I could do nothing but, quote, troubleshoot the error and move on. Such experiences have taught me that the ability to acknowledge and disregard failure is integral to research, and yet the lab is no place for heroics. Being proactive also includes disregarding masculine conceptions and contacting the professor if something goes wrong. Indeed, on the lab bench, my failures have taught me much more than my successes. Now, as I research multiple sclerosis and its pathogenesis at the Harvard Medical Institute, I realize I've fulfilled my 9th grade ideal. Yet I've come to the true understanding that this is just as valuable as, quote, plant projects. Every aspect of research has the possibility to affect millions of people, and I am grateful to have taken part in this service for the past 4 years. In my future medical career, I plan to utilize the valuable lessons I learned as a student researcher. But until that time comes, I'm sure I'll poke a few more holes in things. Okay, that relatively serious, definitely had to do with his interest in STEM, but I think that it was more sort of a passion piece, more about how he felt about research and the lessons learned. So the fact that it was STEM related didn't bother me in the least, because it had nothing to do with an essay about why a particular major or why a specific interest in, medicine or STEM. Okay. So now we'll do another one that I think is funny that actually has to do with a student's hair. Bright, red, like Superman's cape and as loud as the wail of a siren. That's my hair. Let me just interrupt to say this is creative writing at its best. Her first sentence is the word bright. Okay, where's the subject? Where's the verb? There is none, just an adjective. Red, same thing, but it's making the point. So this is what you can do with creative writing. Okay, so here we go, second paragraph. Even on a normal day at the supermarket, my mane is a coiled lightning rod for everything from compliments to unsolicited advice to never dye it or cut it, all from complete strangers. Others go as far as to say if they had scissors that they would cut it and make a wig for themselves. So what's a girl to do besides steer clear of the shears? I grew up with this attention around me, and I believe the comments shaped my direction. Naturally introverted, I've become more at ease over time due to the number of people I communicate with, all thanks to the world's curliest conversation starter. Building a sense of self aside from my helmet of hair was no simple feat. When I was younger, I felt overshadowed by my hair. It was something I hadn't chosen, yet it seemed to define me. And its impression was powerful. I now realize I spent years feeling like an outcast because I did not understand the value of what I would come to call my powers. As I grew, I found myself passionate about empowering the less fortunate in my community. The world needs a hero, but again, what is one girl to do? I already did not know what to do with the tiny bit of attention I received for my messy bun, but the desire to give back to my community was incentive finally to let my hair down, so to speak. I decided to have my hair function as a metaphorical red cape. It's the uniform any superhero needs to fight for the greater good. Here is how I use my powers. I'd been integral in various local service endeavors, but my hair taught me to think big and bright. I went global. Most notably, I raised money for Balinese children's education. I contact Kadik, the child I sponsor, by writing letters, and he replies with letters of his own about working in order to buy his family food and a shelter during the rainy seasons. Kadik is a lesson in gratitude, for he is so grateful for his family and the opportunities education brings him. Prior to that first year working together, I had committed to raising money for my child's education. But after just a few written exchanges, I felt personally invested in assisting Kadik, a young boy I'd never met and who lived halfway around the world. My inner hero, equally aflame as my bright red cape, had revealed herself. Kadik has sent me artwork he created in school. One drawing I received from him was of a lion, a proud mane intact. I, too, now pride myself on my red locks, for it brought me to Kadik. For my senior year, I am sponsoring a new child. Kadik graduated. I know now that this red beacon of my hair was a placebo. I had the confidence to make connections with Kadik and write back to him with my own experience with work and how close I am, too, with my family. Conversation starter, cape, mane, red, in capital letters. It may be what you first notice, but it has lasting powers. Okay, so I thought that was also pretty interesting. And sometimes kids laugh at me when I say write about your hair, but you can certainly see how writing about your hair can really convey a huge message. I'm not going to show you the picture of the next one yet. What I'm going to tell you is that it was a different essay question. It was not the personal statement. It was one of the more common essay questions that many colleges ask, which is asking you to elaborate on one of your meaningful extracurricular activities. However, you're not supposed to write like you're writing your resume that, I played baseball and I loved playing and I learned great lessons on the field and the camaraderie, and because that type of stuff can be, in a resume if stated appropriately. So what I particularly love about this lesson, this essay, is that I understand how the student actually feels. I can see him or her. I can feel that same feeling. And the student does not mention the sport until a couple of sentences in, but does use some lingo from the sport early on. So it has a great opening and that makes you think. So I'm not going to actually show you the picture until I think you might have already figured out for yourself what sport the student is writing about. And by the way, this was a recruited athlete. This was not his personal statement, which had to be about something completely different than athletics. And it was not about what a superstar he was in this particular sport, but how the sport made him feel. And you could see him. In fact, you could probably almost smell him. Anyway, the moment I step on the field, I feel a tremendous hunger to compete. Maybe it's the touch of the ball. According to coach, the first touch is the most important. Maybe it's a surge of electricity and excitement as I feel when the magic of a bicycle kick changes our advantage to score a great goal. Sprinting down the field, I feel alive. Soon enough, I'm in the heat of battle with sweat pouring from my body, my legs driving like pistons, mud dripping from my uniform, and my heart beating faster than a mouse's. Whether in triumph or defeat, I just like to be out there playing, competing, strategizing, trying new moves. Before every game, my dad always tells me, do it with a smile. But I don't need telling. Soccer is my game. It's what keeps me going. And certainly after sprinting, diving, dodging, tackling, hustling, and jumping for a full 90 minutes, smiling is easy work. I'd probably be exhausted, by the way. So I thought that really came from the heart, and you know how much soccer means to him. So here's another one that also was in response to talk about one of your most meaningful extracurricular activities. And she did have a lot of detail about this particular activity, but it's only this essay that tells you truly how she felt about this activity. Okay, he's up in the tree, his dark eyes smiling mischievously at me. I smile back, wave, and say in Spanish, Juan, I know you're up there. Come down for dinner. The tiny tan boy launches from the limb with a screech of, Vámonos, Elizabeth. I feel elated as I wrap my arms around the 6-year-old orphan and swing him onto my back while scooping up his younger brother. We're off to the kitchen, where earlier I had prepared meals for the boys in the Mosquitos orphanage. Here in Mexico, amidst the boys with no parents, I have learned that anyone can be a teacher, a cook, a storyteller, a consoler of tears, or the inspiration for laughter and love. I have watched Juan, at the age of 6, be all of that and more for the other boys at the orphanage. And I know that throughout my life, I will always strive to be that inspiration for my family, my community, my world. What I love about this essay is she didn't come back and say, well, now I can, I used to take everything for granted and now I can appreciate all the things I have. Or isn't it wonderful how these poor, underprivileged, orphaned kids appreciate so much. She never said that. She basically said that one of these kids was a role model for her. That was an incredibly different ending than you might have expected. And I loved her phrase. She did call them once orphans, but she talked about the boys with no parents. And I think when you read a line like that, it can almost bring tears to your eyes. And then The why question is incredibly popular. A huge number of colleges are going to ask you why you want to go there. And what you can't say is this: I would like to go to Judy University because I know that it is filled with smart kids and renowned professors. It has the best English department anywhere, according to U.S. News and World Report. It is in a major metropolitan area where I will be able to take advantage of the theater and the arts and even major league ball games. It is the perfect distance from home because I can get there in one flight, so I can get home to my family if need be, or they can come and visit me. And I will be able to enjoy the 4 seasons, which is very important to me, having grown up in the sweltering heat of Florida. Okay, that essay will be thrown in the garbage because you can't tell me what college that was for. It was just much too generic. So in order to write a really good why are you applying to this college, or why do you want this major at this college, you have to do a significant amount of research. You're either going to be doing it beyond the college's website, perhaps looking at social media, especially unofficial social media like, Instagram and YouTube, to see what other kids are saying. And, or you really have to visit and be a great observer and ask a lot of questions. So, and by the way, once you write your first one, it can become a template for writing them for all the others, because you just have to change the names of perhaps a few professors, a few courses, a research project, an extracurricular activity. And they all have different lengths. It could be as short as 150 words, or it could be as long as 500 words. So this is one that asked why the University of Pennsylvania. Okay. It was not the quaint historic setting or the sculptural display of modern art that caught my attention one Friday afternoon in Philadelphia. While I was fascinated by the extraordinary architecture and urban flair of the University of Pennsylvania, it was the spirit of the student body that truly captivated me. Strolling down Locust Walk, and by the way, that's one of the main drags on the Penn campus. Strolling down Locust Walk, I was hoping to absorb in a brief moment all the activity that defined the university. Immediately, I was surrounded by a horde of cheerful girls urging me to join their sorority. I took another few steps and stumbled upon a table sponsored by Hillel, where students were telling their peers of upcoming Shabbat services. However, as I approached the class of 1920 Commons, I was particularly excited by the outward political activism on campus. The college Democrats stood on one side of the walkway and the college Republicans on the other, both handing out literature and encouraging others to become involved. I knew then that Penn is the place for me. Locust Walk is not only the social center of campus, but also the pathway I'll take to a myriad of classes and activities. Of primary interest to me is the philosophy, politics, and economics major. As a debater, philosophy enthusiast, and quintessential math nerd, I look forward to merging each of these disciplines into one with courses such as philosophy and the Constitution, and law and economics. My pursuits in international politics have spawned my interest in the Middle Eastern affairs. While I regularly read about events occurring overseas, I hope to take a more in-depth approach to learning about the religions, governments, and ideologies of the area. I'm especially interested in studying the Arabic language, which will prepare me for a career in international law or the Foreign Service. The PPE major and the ability to thoroughly explore the Middle East produce an irresistible combination unavailable at any other undergraduate school. Like Penn's unique curriculum, the system of college housing also sets the university apart as an intriguing place for me. A residence hall at Penn is a community of students who share common interests, not simply a place to live. Considering my reputation as a political pundit, Law and Society in Fisher Hassenfeld College House is the perfect home for me to socialize with like-minded students. Alternatively, having spent countless hours in my synagogue, school, and local library tutoring children in Hebrew, Spanish, and various core subjects, I would embrace the chance to continue guiding students as a member of the Mentors program in Reapy College House. It is my ever-growing thirst for knowledge and involvement that would be aptly met by the diverse curriculum and hundreds of student organizations at Penn. Next year, I hope to find myself on Locust Walk, not as a bystander, but as an active and thriving Quaker. So gives you an idea of a longer why essay. Another question.
So no, there was a comment.
Oh, the comment.
Said the essay about UPenn sounds like a very common sight on campus during rush week, and the residential arrangement sounds like Rice.
Okay, so yes, this does sound like rush week. One of those early weeks of school where it's not just sororities and fraternities, but it's where all the clubs are out there, hawking their wares and trying to get you to join. So she looked like a college student, which is why they, called her over, and she liked feeling involved that way. In terms of the college housing, in some sense, yes, it sounds like Rice, because Rice is divided into, it's actually adding one more, I can't remember, it's going up to 11 or 12 residential colleges that you live in for all your years at Rice. Here at Penn, you get to pick if you want a residential college. The entire place is not divided into residential colleges at Penn, but many colleges have like living and learning communities or residential colleges where you can choose to live with like-minded kids. But at Rice, you're actually assigned to one when you are admitted. It becomes like your co-ed sorority fraternity. You will feel that your closest friends are, living with you, and you'll continually compete against other residential houses, either for top academics or maybe the top homecoming float. But any college that offers you different kinds of learning and living residential communities makes for a very a warm and friendly, collegial, collaborative type of environment, and one in which you can engage with kids from the moment you step foot on campus. Another one?
How early would you recommend to start college applications?
How early would I recommend starting college applications? Okay, so the Common App has actually been designed now that you can start at even 9th or 10th grade. Personally, I wouldn't. But when you get onto Common App, it asks you like what future year you're applying to college. And Common App comes down for maintenance a few days at the end of July every year to get retooled for the following year. So for example, the kids who I work with privately, who are now rising seniors, almost all of them started their applications during junior year. Some started them as early as February or March. Many of them started them like the minute final exams or AP exams were over, and they can get most of the basic stuff done. They can be well along in their personal statement. And when Common App comes back up on August 1st, the first question they will be asked is something not so simple, but as this, but do you want to roll over your application into next year? And many of the pages on app completely roll over, and so that you don't lose the work that you've done. So personally, I would start my application, as sometime junior year. It only takes a few hours to fill out most of the basic pages. The activities page takes a lot longer, and you should really have a great resume to do it from. And of course, your essay could take, many, many weeks to create. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to let Kathy take over. I think that I pretty much already answered the COVID-19 question. It is very optional. It's in the additional information. It's right after your personal statement. Write it only if you feel that you have a pretty significant yes or no type of answer. But let Kathy take over, and here's where she's going to tell you exactly where you can find essay supplements. Sometimes even before the colleges announce them.
All right, so back in. All right, so yeah, the supplemental essay questions. I think probably the best source right now is using a page like prompt.com. We put the URL right there. They tend to be really good about starting to update college essays and their new prompts as you move throughout the summer. And then you can always go to colleges' websites. Like a lot of college admissions keep some really great blogs, and they'll post the questions throughout the summer. On Common App, they've got two different sources. So you can go to the college's member page. Now, right now, if you've already created your Common App, you can log in and you can look at the previous year's questions, and that can usually help you anticipate, what sort of application essays you're going to see in addition to the personal statement. So for instance, a college that for many years has asked a why this college or a why this major at this college essay is probably going to ask that type of question again the following year. Some of the schools that might ask slightly more either critical thinking or creative, almost like another personal statement type question. Wake Forest always has really great essays. They have lots of essays. They have lists. They have top 10 lists. Those will usually change from year to year. Some of those questions will stay the same. Some of them will update. So, but if you just want to get a preview, like the student who asked the earlier, when can I start writing these questions? Well, go to prompt, see if there are any updates. They're slowly trickling in. To me, I find that it's in a little later this year that I'm not seeing as many. We're not seeing as many prompts released quite yet. Or you can even go to a college's member page and take a peek at what they shared last year. What'll be nice is when the Common App rolls over, and gosh, we're only looking about a number of like 15, 16 days. We're already halfway through July. Then you can find them all on Common App, either when you add the colleges to your My Colleges tab section, then you can go right in and take a look. Or if you want to see every single supplemental and you just search by name of school, you can go to that other URL, the appsupport.commanapp.org, and you'll find them all listed there. Today, if you went there, you would see last year's prompts. But again, it's a good prediction. Look at colleges' websites, look at admissions blog. But, really right now, if you haven't started your personal statement, I would say focus on that for the next couple weeks and then start writing the college's own essays beginning on August 1st. And these were just, we've given a number of examples of the more popular ones, why our college, why this major, elaborate on one of your extracurricular activities. So we heard that great one for the volunteer, for soccer. And then some other ones, again, that can be, a little bit more critical thinking, creative, actually engaging. What do you like to read? Give a list of your top 5 books and explain whether or not you read them for class or outside of class. Which one was your favorite and why? Tell us about an idea that you had found intellectually engaging. So there's a myriad of supplemental essay questions, but they tend to follow along those similar themes, asking you to elaborate on some of your other interests or more about, why do you want to attend our college? Why is this the perfect fit for you? And as we're coming to the close of our presentation tonight, that's some of what we do is through our college counseling is we work with students to write essays, either through comprehensive college planning, where we work with students from start to finish, every aspect, including guidance, creating a great college list. We do a lot of private sessions, one-on-one, which are just essay focused. I'm starting to work with a good number of students, usually beginning around June. So I've already got a few hourly students. We've got college admissions boot camps coming up. So we've got ones that are going to be run through Boca High and Suncoast, but they're open to all students. There's going to be both a virtual and in-person component. Next week, I'm actually running a small group application essay workshop. It's 2 hours a day, 4 days next week. It's small group, and we have a few students sign up. We've got a few spaces available. And we always run an essay special as well, too. If you just would like to have a single essay reviewed by one of our essay experts, we offer that as well. Next Thursday, and I've actually gotten a great number of signups, so I'm really excited. I'm going to be hosting a Zoom essay brainstorming session. It will be same time next Thursday. It's going to be over Zoom, so it'll be, you're welcome to have your cameras on, mics on, and just bring those questions. So any questions, if we didn't get a chance to answer them, bring any of those brainstorming questions, and we can talk about your essay questions and also share ideas. I did this last summer and it was quite wonderful. Students shared topics. They helped each other out. Ideally, I don't want to speak much, but certainly I'm there to help give guidance. And that was awesome. And you can go ahead and sign up for that at Personal Statement Guru, and you'll get the link to the Zoom meeting. And then, of course, for any of our programs or upcoming boot camps, we've got the names and addresses of all of our wonderful Learning Center directors. And you can also find that information at scoreatthetop.com. And then just a few of our things that we have coming up over the summer. And also all of our previous webinars are always recorded, and you can always view them at your leisure. And we'll have further ones coming up in the next couple of months as we start getting more information in for this application cycle. And then here is our contact information. And then, yeah, any other questions?
Nope, no other questions really.
All right. Well, just to say thank you to everyone for attending tonight, and I hope to look forward to seeing hopefully many of you in our Zoom session next week.
Now, I'd like to say thank you again, for attending. The session tonight was recorded, and for anyone who has registered, you'll be getting information, I believe, an email to let you know where the recording is. Although you could always, email us if you'd like, to get, if you didn't get that email, we're happy to, just send it to you. Just, you can email us at info at scoreatthetop.com, or Judy, Judi, or Hart, HART, at scoreatthetop.com, or jraeducationalconsulting.com. Almost any of those emails will get to us.
We're easy to find.
Yeah, we're pretty easy to find. We hope we've been really helpful to you, that we've been inspired ideas, and hopefully we can be a resource for you or your friends in the future. So have a great evening and stay healthy and enjoy the rest of summer. Good night.
Good night.